following is a bonus show recorded reviewing the Odyssey in conjunction with the history podcast, Well, That Aged Well.
Today we are going to do a collaboration, which is a little bit different because we are going to review a book today. And it's none other than Odyssey by Homer. Unfortunately, not Homer Simpson. I had to do that joke. But the famous Odyssey. And of course, if you are a history buff like me, and especially on antiquity, this is a must read. And unfortunately, I didn't actually read it. I'm gonna be honest, but I listened to it on audiobook because I work quite a lot where I am able to listen to audiobooks. And the great Ian McKellen was the one who read the audiobook, so that was worthwhile. But what is it about the Odyssey you think that makes it stand the test of time until today?
I mean, the thing is, it is the stereotypical epic, the epic poem, the epic story that so many things then are based on. And we can tell, it wasn't just another piece of literature, even to the Greeks, even to them, the Iliad and the Odyssey in particular, both of Homer's works were the pinnacle. Homer was seen as being above Hesiod or any other kind of poems or any of the kind of playwrights that came later in classical antiquity. It was just, this is the standard for this kind of work. And that would have, been something that they would have then passed on, through the future. And when the Romans came into to Athens, they were very, very respectful of Athenian culture. So it would have kept some of its prestige. And I guess it's just survived, from there. And obviously we take a lot of things that have passed on through history from the Greeks and from the Romans. But it still holds up as a piece of literature. I mean, I've just reread it there. I've read it a few years ago, but I just reread it last week or the week before. And I mean, it is still a good read. It's something that I would say about the Odyssey that I wouldn't say about the Iliad is that it still holds up just as a story, just as a novel,
In a way, wasn't this the world's first sequel, in a sense?
Yeah, I mean, I suppose it is. And the interesting thing is, it is a sequel to the Iliad.
But you don't have to read the Iliad.
No. I mean, to be honest, I would actually recommend reading the Odyssey first.
Yeah, that's what I did. I haven't read the Iliad yet. I want to because, as famously, the Iliad also inspired Anacreonmus' Alexiad. You can see the similarities there.
Yeah, here's the problem I have. The Odyssey still holds up as a nice story. You could give that to someone who'd never heard of ancient Greece and they could read it and just think this is a cool story. Whereas the Iliad, you couldn't. It can be a bit more boring, to be honest, and I mean, this is coming from someone who reads ancient Greek court speeches and histories and biographies and anything I can get my hands on. But I struggle with the Iliad. It's a really dull book. It's a blow by blow account that, just pages and pages and pages of this person hate this person and this person hate this person. It's very, very tedious. Whereas the Odyssey is actually an epic. You could see them making a movie of the Odyssey today still.
I'm quite surprised that they did try to make one in the 90s, but I'm quite surprised they haven't made one in rewrite with the technology we have
I'm
today.
Surprised as well. To be honest, there's so much from the ancient Greek canon that could be remade into movies. Hollywood's running out of ideas, guys. There's so much just waiting to be remade.
It definitely would be a blockbuster, and you don't have to read the book as well to see them if you want to see the movie. Yeah. But let's talk about, before we get into the story, let's talk about your podcast first. Then we try to talk a little bit of mine, because this episode will both be published on Book Boys and
so we're doubling this one up.
So so let's first start talking about your podcast.
Cool. So my podcast is called Books Boys, and I host that with my friend PJ. And it's a monthly book review where we just chat about the books we've been reading that month. So in a similar way that I'm going to chat about the Odyssey now, we would just chat about whatever books we've been reading throughout the month, and then we give some recommendations. And usually we interview an author as well every episode.
And my podcast is, as for those who listen on my episode, which one I publish, is about history, where I interview historians every week, and we talk about new topics. Like earlier today, I recorded early last week for this episode. I recorded an episode about two-part episode about the Danish Empire. We did some Danish writers who wrote about the historical Danish Empire, and I jotted plenty of episodes on ancient Rome and American history. But I tried to do any kind of history from ancient Romans to until today.
I've listened to probably about half of your episodes, actually. I wanted to start with the earliest episodes in terms of history. So I listened to the Egyptian one and some of the Roman army type ones, and early Roman empire type episodes.
Yeah, and buying Goldsworth's book about the Roman army. I'm reading Mary Bird's book right now, but I'm looking forward to reading that one after.
Awesome. No, I mean, Greece is my... So I studied ancient history in school, and we did modules in both, ancient Greece and ancient Rome. I just chose to then continue with Greece. So I did study a little bit of ancient Rome, but so I do have an interest in that. But Greece was just the one that really spoke to me more.
Yeah, fair enough. For me, it's always been Rome, but I intend to do more Greece history. I definitely want to look more into that because it's fascinating as well.
It is I don't know. Maybe ancient Athens is the best civilization we've ever had. I don't know. I mean, don't get me wrong. There's still problems with it. They still had slavery. They still, was a very sexist society.
It just seemed really like a chill society, to be honest. Like just chill and drink wine.
At times.
Philosophers.
At times. There's this nice idea that, every day was just walking around the Agora with Socrates.
Yeah, obviously it wasn't. We got the Peloponnesian War, and
during that entire period they were in war. So
yeah, but yeah, let's get into the Odyssey and start from the beginning. I suggest.
Yeah. So,
and it doesn't start with so it's about Odysseus initially, who's traveling back to. I forgot his home country. So you gotta refresh.
So he's heading back to Ithaca. Now, basically,
it doesn't start.
It doesn't start with him.
It starts
with his son Telemachus. I don't know. I mean, just as a preface to this, Telemachus is an interesting character because I'm not a big fan. I loved Odysseus. I'm just not a big fan of his son. But maybe that'll kind of bear out as we talk about it.
Yeah, and he's set up because his father had been gone banished by the gods for 10 years, and his son he does not like the suitors because his wife, Odysseus' wife, is supposed to get married again because they think she's dead, and he wants to find his father to prove that he's still alive.
So this essentially picks up on where the Iliad is about the siege of Troy. And then this is the aftermath specifically for Odysseus and his family. So everyone's returned from Troy now, except for Odysseus and his a few crewmen of his, and they're the only ones who haven't returned. And that was a 10-year siege at Troy, and we've now had another almost 10 years. He's gone 19 years, I think, altogether. So it's an insane period of time to be gone. And you're right, there are these suitors who have moved into his home with his wife Penelope and his son Telemachus, and they're essentially saying, well, he's been gone for almost 2 decades. You got to marry one of us, And she keeps kind of saying, in theory, maybe that's going to happen soon, but in reality, she's not taking any steps to pick one of them. And there seems to be 100 of them. There's a ridiculous amount of them eating all their food and slaughtering all their animals, and abusing the servants. And from what I see, sexually abusing the maids is mentioned actually once or twice as well. So just running rampant in the house, essentially.
Yeah, and you can see why she don't want to marry them.
Yeah, I mean they don't present themselves very positively, but at the same time, Penelope's supposed to be the archetypal perfect wife. She's no matter how long Odysseus is gone, she's still in love with Odysseus, and she just sits around at her loom and spindle, weaving her fabric and reminiscing about her husband, and never moving on.
Now his son does meet a god before he leaves, and that tells him that I forget the name.
It's Athena. Yeah.
Athena. I wasn't sure. I was about to say, but I wasn't sure it was her. But she meets Athena. She tells him him that he's alive and that she has to set on a journey to find, and that's initially where part 1 starts.
Yeah, pretty much. That's where we start. Telemachus would have liked, the others in the town, kind of the elders or whatever, to kind of get on board with him in kicking out the suitors and going to find his dad. But no one really seems to be that interested. So, off he goes basically by himself. And it's curious because everyone's worried about poor Telemachus, as though he's just a kid who can't handle himself. All the crazy feats that his dad had done, and they don't see him as being equal to those.
Mm. And it does try to find people who fought with his father, and it tries to ask them where they last saw him, do they think that he's alive, and it tries to gather information from those who fought with his father 10 years ago.
A lot of this is going to focus on the trials that Odysseus goes through, but let's talk about the trials Telemachus goes through. It's almost nothing. I mean, his journey and his story is laughable in comparison. He goes to Menelaus, who was the husband and a king of Sparta and a husband of Helen, who was, the face that launched 1,000 ships, the reason for the Trojan War. And
to be honest, his story is kind of forgettable.
He's irrelevant, to be honest. He is, because he just goes to find his dad. He gets, he speaks with Menelaus. He just kind of hangs out, chills for a bit. Yes, okay, later they do think about killing him, but he seems to easily escape that, comes back, and that's it. Like, his story is not much.
And it's not really mentioned until Odysseus is back from his journey as well.
He disappears, I think, now I'm going to be approximate, but from roughly page 60 to, 200 something, like, he disappears.
Yeah. So you can see how irrelevant he is, and that it was just it's kind of a filler story, to be honest.
Yeah, he is. Now, he does become important at the end, when he teams up with Odysseus. We'll get to that later. But yeah, he's the intro and he's the outro. He doesn't really do a lot he's gone from the entire middle of the book.
Mm. And then where do we leave? Tacitus. Sorry, I'm bad with names, but where do we leave him?
Telemachus. So he's with Menelaus, and he's just chatting with Menelaus and Helen. And there's an interesting thing. Because there's two different kind of historical views on Helen, because she's this virtuous wife who was kidnapped, and there's this amazing siege to get her back, or she was a bit of a conniving cheater who went off with someone else, and then this possessive and obsessive husband kidnapped her back. So there's like two completely different ways that you can view it. And I mean, and you do see even in the classical plays, which are usually based loosely on the Odyssey or the Iliad, there are different interpretations available. Homer himself chooses to have Helen deliver this lovely little speech where she says that Aphrodite, the goddess of love, basically, confused her, and off she went with someone else, but then she overcame it and was very happy to be rescued, which I suppose is the easiest way out for all parties concerned. Yeah.
And then we go back to Odysseus, or not back, but we meet Odysseus for the first time. And if I remember correctly, he is in Ethiopia, I would say.
Yeah, I think more or less, but he's on an island specifically, a small island, with the goddess Calypso. And Calypso, she's a goddess, but she's not an Olympian goddess. So we're talking an isolated island where it's pretty much just her, and she has this man captured, and he's there for a long time.
I mean, to be honest, I wouldn't complain about being stranded on the island.
I mean, that's the thing. He's stuck there, and there's supposed to be maybe not even peril, but just the idea that he's kidnapped. But actually, he's sleeping with her every night. He's dining at her palace. They're having quite a nice time of it.
I mean, I wouldn't complain if that was me,
He's having it pretty easy.
Yeah, I mean, it should be worse than banishments.
Well, look, that's the thing. Getting kidnapped's never great, but if you must get kidnapped in the house of a goddess, I suppose is the best way to go.
Yeah, and so he decides that it's time to escape. And how does he try to escape?
So he does at this point still have some crewmen available. But he needs to figure out why he's been secluded this whole time. Why is he stuck there? So, it kind of occurs to him, well, I must have annoyed one of the gods, because that's the reason for everything in these stories. One of the gods is annoyed. So he speaks to...
I believe it was Zeus, if I'm not mistaken.
Well, Zeus is kind of in on it, but the god who is principally annoyed is his brother Poseidon, the sea god. So Zeus is actually, in this and in a lot of Greek literature, Zeus doesn't really do actually that much. He's kind of in charge, and people will ask him for advice or permission, but he's never the instigator of a lot of things. So it's Poseidon who's doing that. And what he has to do, he has to go through this interesting trial where essentially there's this old guy who knows which god it is, and Odysseus needs to find out. And this guy is a kind of shapeshifter. So he has to hold on to him and pin him down, and then the guy turns into like a bunch of different animals, and he just has to keep holding him down until he goes through all his different forms. Even when he turns into water and could slip away, or fire and could burn your hands, just keep holding him down. This is what his daughter tells Odysseus, his daughter Ino. Hold him down, and eventually, you will get an answer from him. He'll exhaust himself. He'll go back to his normal form, and he'll tell you which god you have annoyed. And of course, he then says, yes, it is Poseidon.
And he tries to make a raft, and he tries to get away, but Poseidon managed to create a storm, and then he keeps getting his raft destroyed and has to go back every time initially.
Yeah, I mean, he goes around the sea, and he spends a few years now just traveling around the sea on his sort of ship, constantly getting lost in one place and another, and Poseidon constantly interfering with him. And he never seems to go where he's going. He goes in circles at one point, actually. There's a few places he ends up visiting twice. Specifically, he goes back to, later on we'll see Circe. He goes back to her twice, and he meets some of the monsters twice. So he doesn't have a straight path, because let's be honest, the ancient Greek world's not very big. It doesn't take years to sail across, but he just doesn't have an easy time of it.
Yeah, and they didn't have the technology we have today to try to navigate either, so kind of been easy.
Yeah, it always reminds me of the kind of the Moses story, where they go through the desert and it takes them 40 days, and actually you could walk across it in like a few hours or something. It's kind of similar. Like he could have sailed home in a day, but it took 10 years or something like that.
Yeah. So what happened next when he finally gets on the raft and he finally gets going?
So he gets going. So basically, what happens is he actually does land somewhere. He get the sea storms and everything, but he eventually does land somewhere, and with the aid of some nymphs. And he says, "What country have I come to now? What kind of people are here? Some brutal tribe of lawless savages, or kindly and God-fearing folk?" So he lands somewhere, and he just has no idea what it is. And he sees some girls that he assumes are nymphs, river nymphs, or grass meadow nymphs. They sound like Pokemon almost with their different types. But so he creeps out from under the bushes, and this is quite startling because he's naked at this point, from all the ship troubles and skins peeling off his hands and everything else. And he comes out naked, and he basically says, "Well, I'm just going to jump up and scare these girls." So he pounces like a mountain lion, and he like about to hunt oxen, and he, naked as he was, he bears down upon these gentle girls, and some of them run off, and that's fine. But Alcinous's daughter,
I mean, I would too, to be honest.
Yeah, I mean, I would run off, to be fair, if this, because he's a big, muscly guy.
You can't blame them.
You definitely can't blame them. But Alcinous's daughter actually takes a liking to him. Now, he then goes to the palace of Alcinous, and there's a lot of kings and sort of sub-kings in different areas, because, you didn't travel around much, so you could kind of be the king of one village in those days, So he goes to the palace of Alcinous, and, he seems like a good chap. He's hanging out. The daughter clearly likes him. He's also then having, to be honest, a relatively easy time, again, at the palace of Alcinous.
Yeah. But isn't this where you find out that his man has been kidnapped as well, that they're still alive as well?
Yeah, so he does have some guys that we find out are still alive. It's also around the same time. I skipped a little bit, and we overlooked one thing, which is around this time, Telemachus is at this point still with Menelaus. The suitors decide to send a few of their number to lay a trap for him and kill him on his way back. Okay, so that's the only piece of peril that Telemachus will face, and Athena just helps him through it like a doddle. He doesn't even see them in ambush. But that's his story. This is kind of they're taking place in parallel.
And didn't Athena as well want kind of a gift from him as well as a payment, sort of, if I remember correctly? Athena wanted a gift from him as well, kind of as a payment, something gold for helping me out.
I don't remember specifically, but it happens a lot where you will have to then go and give some kind of sacrifice and praise to the gods. I mean, that was the problem in the first place, is that they didn't go through all the sacrifices and offerings to Poseidon and to the gods. That's what caused all this trouble. So at several points in the novel, they then say, well, as soon as I get back, I'm going to make a great offering to this god and this person who helped me. And, and there's actually a lot of that. And that's, that's fine. That was the kind of norm at the time. While he's in the palace of Alcinous, they do some games, the Phoenician games. So it's just your Greek Olympic style, sports, discus and running and so forth. And at first, he doesn't want to really participate, but one of the guys kind of eggs him on. He's a bit rude. He says, you come in here and you're crap, So then he gets up and he takes on some of the sports and he wins, at anything he wants to turn his hand to.
I mean, obviously,
he's Odysseus. They describe him several times as godlike, so he's not just a normal guy. Yeah. He's a big, impressive warrior.
And then he finds out about this witch on this island, which has the power to transform people into animals.
So that's coming up. There's two things. That's the second thing that happens. But basically, we now enter a period where in Alcinous' palace, he starts to regale them with his adventures that he's already done. So actually, a large portion of the middle of this book is a story that he's telling. It's set in the recent past. It's not current. In a way, that's a mistake because it means that he's going to survive because he's sitting telling you the story. So that's it reduces the peril, sadly. But Circe, you're talking of, she's the second one. The first one is the Cyclops.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I forgot about Cyclops. Yeah.
So they go to this again. They're just traveling around at this point on the raft, and they're getting shipwrecked here and there and whatever, and starving, and clothes blown off in the sea, skin flailed off. So there's a lot of this going on, and eventually they land somewhere.
No, we should probably mention that, and it's worth mentioning, but I do forget which Cyclops is son of Greek mythology is not my strong suit here. But the Cyclops is the son of a certain god
Poseidon.
as well.
So this is the reason that Poseidon is. I mean, yes, they didn't make the right sacrifices. That was part of it. But the specific reason why, other than any other god, Poseidon is so on Odysseus's tail here is because of what happens with the Cyclops. So these big one-eyed monsters. I mean, everyone knows what a Cyclops is, I guess. They're in a little village. And Odysseus and some of his men, who are at this point, still alive, they arrive in the village, and they decide, he's got some sheep and everything else. Let's see what we can help ourselves to. And they end up trapped in a cave with the Cyclops. Okay. Now, Odysseus, obviously, he's the one they always look to, not just because he's their commander, but because he's the strongest and the quickest witted as well. So he's a perfect all-round specimen. Someone that a wife will wait 20 years to see again. He's the perfect man. And they all look to him for help.
Except for a few adulteries around here and there.
I mean, that's the thing. Yeah, he does have a few adulteries, actually. Not with goddesses, and so forth. But yeah. So they have the Cyclops, and this is this big, monstrous guy who could, grind their bones to make his bread, essentially, and they're terrified, and he wants to eat humans, and I think he does kill a few of the number, but they're worried about what's going to happen here. So what happens is, Odysseus originally, just wants to take him on and fight him, but then he thinks better of it. He thinks, well, I can't do that because, even if I attack him, even if I have some success, he might not die, or his friends might come and they'll kill all my men. So it's not a good plan to just attack him outright. So what they decide to do is they need to escape. So they do
Yeah.
this trick where they hide underneath these big sheep that he has, and they each attach themselves. They just grab on to like the underbelly of the sheep and get escorted out of the cave under the sheep. And silly old Cyclops doesn't see it happen. But there's this nice scene where the Cyclops asks Odysseus, "Who is he?" And he says, "I'm nobody." But then what happens is, Odysseus obviously can't resist. And while the Cyclops is asleep, they give him plenty of wine. But at one point, and while he's asleep, they stab his eye out. So the Cyclops is now blind.
Yeah.
And this is what enrages Poseidon. But the problem is, he told them that his name is Nobody. So we get this nice little joke where he goes to all his friends and says, nobody has done this to me. I can't see, but nobody has done it. And they all say, well, if no one's done it, then, you've done it yourself or whatever. So just a little word trick there. It's a bit silly, but...
Yeah. And then he goes off and he finally managed to escape. And then he goes and hear about his witch, as we talked about earlier.
Yes, we now meet Cersei. Not Cersei Lannister, but the goddess Cersei. And she sort of lives in... My impression is it's a beautiful Disney castle, basically. And they go up and they hear, beautiful singing. And she's a fair goddess. But they find these weird, almost Alice in Wonderland type characters, these anthropomorphic sort of animals. But they're very strange because these animals, they're friendly and nice. They're not attacking. We're talking lions and things like that, but they're not attacking.
Yeah.
So Odysseus sends some of his men in, and they get turned into animals. So now we find out what's happening. Cersei's, giving people a banquet and turning them into animals.
Now, actually, I want to mention this because I was watching a long time ago, but there is a theory that there is some truth to this, that this should actually have happened, but they mentioned drugs in the book as well, and that should be part of it, that because they were taking drugs, they could make believe that they were turned into animals because of the drugs that they took. So there should be more or less some truth of this. And of course, again, they did not know much about drugs or medicine at that time, as we know today. So that it could be very well be some truth that the drugs
it's very,
made
very
them
possible.
believe.
I mean, if you were even talking about the Pythia, the oracle at Dionysius, when you go up to speak, her entire job was to be a priestess who would essentially be high the whole time, from these fumes and spout nonsense prophecies that,
I know somebody would love that job.
I think a lot of people would like that job.
But yeah, so there should be some truth that they actually believed that they were animals, not that they were, but they believed it.
Obviously, it's fair to say they weren't really animals, but they very well may have believed it. That's certainly possible. So only half the crew get turned into animals, So then the other half are saying, well, we're not going up there. And Erelocus in particular kind of almost leads a rebellion and sort of says, I'm not having anything to do with this, and I'm not going back there. And then Odysseus, because he's king of men, he just goes and fixes it. He goes and talks to Cersei and just chats with her and explains that this isn't, a good way to go. And Cersei essentially falls in love with him and says, that's grand. I'll turn them back. You can stay here. We'll have dinner parties and banquets every evening. Odysseus has to sleep with me.
And he gets around again.
And they stay there for a year.
Yeah. Now, it's something that we did not mention as well. I think I remember this, is that he got an antidote. He got an anti-potion against the drugs that they were taking. So that's why he is able to withstand Cersei, because he got this thing that he was able to not be turned into an animal.
He manages to withstand that, and then persuades her to turn everyone else back. And then she just decides, well, fair enough, I've lost, but, I've essentially got a new friend with benefits in Odysseus. So that's kind of where the story goes. And they just chill for a year. And then eventually the crew are nagging Odysseus and they're saying, look, it's been a nice year, but man, we got to get going. So eventually they leave and Cersei says, that's grand. I'll let you go. Here's some advice. Here's the path you need to take. And Odysseus thinks, brilliant. You're going to tell me, straight home, And then all of a sudden, Cersei somehow knows this and says, "No, you're not going home. You're going to go through the underworld." So everyone's groaning like, "Oh no, we've been here for years, man. We're just trying to get home," and they've got to go through the underworld.
And then what happens?
Honestly, at this point, not a lot. So we get the Book of the Dead, and Odysseus goes down, and some people recognize him, and he chats with them. It's almost irrelevant to the story. Like, the only thing that you need to take away is they have a peril. He has to do something that so far only Hercules has done before. Heracles, to give him his Greek name, which is to go to the land of the dead whilst alive. So he does that, and he chats with some people. And it's kind of like Dante's Inferno almost, but he doesn't see anything particularly bad. He just chats with people one by one until he runs out of time and says, "Well, I better head on then." Like, nothing really happens. The only takeaway from it is it's a cool thing that happened that he went to the underworld, but that's kind of it. That's all you need to take away from it.
Yeah, and then he gets home, I believe. There's nothing really else.
Well, wouldn't it be lovely if he got home? But first, he must face two monsters. So he ends up back with Cersei again, and she gives him some more advice, and he sets out to see the monsters. Part of the reason I did leave out a detail, but Zeus does eventually, after the gods all have a little chat, they send their Hermes, the messenger, and he does tell Cersei that, the gods think it would be nice if she let them go. Well, that happens either with Cersei or Calypso. I'm getting them a little bit mixed up actually now. But there is some input from the gods. Because Odysseus has essentially gone in a circle. He's been living with Calypso, having a jolly time of it. Went through one or two trials, and now he's living with Cersei and having a jolly time of it. So, but now, apart from the Cyclops, he hasn't had a lot of peril, but now it's time for two monsters, back-to-back, Scylla and Charybdis. Now, Scylla is this, so basically what they are told is, you're going to be in your ship, and you're going to have two pathways that you can go on. One will be with one monster, and one will be with the other. If you go with Scylla, it's this multi-headed beast that's like built into the caves, so it can't leave the caves, but it has these big long heads and necks, and it'll immediately pick off half a dozen of your crew. So 6 guys dead, guaranteed. And if you hang around, or if you go back, or whatever, potentially 6 more. So, go straight through. Whereas the other option, which is Charybdis, it's just this sort of unknown spooky being under the water who sucks everyone in a vortex and might take the whole crew, or if they time it right, might take no one. So the idea is it's better to lose 6 people than maybe everyone. But nothing's ever so simple for Odysseus, because he ends up going down one path and then, he just kind of messes around a bit and ends up going back down the other path. So he ends up taking on both of the monsters and survives. And
of course, it's important that even when he gets home, he doesn't really go home straight away. We're hanging around a bit even when he gets home. It's not that
this
easy.
Is where, in my opinion, it goes a little bit downhill.
I quite like this part.
This is the part you like. I preferred the adventure stuff.
I liked the entirety, but I like this part as well.
I like when we've got, one thing after another. The Cyclops, Cersei, the guys in the underworld, monsters. Now it's Odysseus, finally gets home. The guys in Alcinous's palace, they pack him up some stuff. They help him get home. To be honest, the journey home's not that easy, because they pack up stuff for him, and then they get shipwrecked again, and everything else happens. But the short version is he eventually makes it home, but he doesn't know where he is. And the reason for this is that Athena is his kind of protectress. And she, at certain times decides it's best to cloud his eyes so he doesn't know where he is or what he's seeing. And it's never really clear why she does this. Sometimes she speaks to him, sometimes she disguises herself as one of his crew to speak to him. And she's just having fun, I guess. But he eventually lands back in Ithaca. Yeah. At the same time, Telemachus is on his way back, almost unscathed. He didn't fight any monsters.
And then, and he meets, like you said, he meets Athena, and she said that, mate, the people as suitors might kill you if they see you back, because they want his wife for themselves. And so she disguises him, and he becomes this kind of the homeless old
he becomes a beggar, essentially. Now, this is dragged out, in my opinion, over 100 pages that it didn't need to be. Basically, he meets up at the... I don't know, if it was me, and I was Odysseus, like this guy who can take on almost anyone, I would just barge into my house and kick the guys out, But no, what happens is he spends a long time chatting to Eumaeus, who's like an old shepherd or goat herd, swine herd, actually.
And he talks about how much he misses Odysseus and his master.
So he has
and
one faithful servant.
It hasn't been the same without him.
And he chats to him, and then Telemachus comes back, and they meet in the hut, but they don't recognize each other at first. And there's a long, stretched out, thing of this. Then he's disguised as this beggar, and he goes to the palace, and no one obviously knows, who he is. It's his palace, but they don't recognize him. He's disguised as an old beggar. And they're kind of mean to him.
He's a really good cosplayer, that one.
Yeah. And they're mean to him. There's one guy in particular, but in general, someone throws a chair at him at one point. Telemachus eventually is horrified. This is not the kind of hospitality that should be to be shown to someone in my house, know. But basically what they then do is they try to kind of kick the beggar out, and then he manages to stay. And then this old lady servant washes his feet and recognizes, I think it's on his ankle or his shin, but she recognizes some kind of scar from his childhood. And the thing is, instead of just saying to her, like, shush, I haven't made up my mind to tell anyone yet, she says, oh, Odysseus has come home. He grabs her by the throat and tells her to shut up. It's really quite, or he'll hurt her. It's really quite unnecessary, actually, from Odysseus.
Yeah, I agree, 100%.
But what happens is...
But eventually his son... And this is where we first see his son again, and like you mentioned, he's trying to be relevant.
Yeah, the son's with him now, but he's not really that relevant until the final battle.
Yeah. But he eventually uncover Odysseus' disguise, or I don't remember if he tells him.
Eventually it's revealed to Telemachus, but they still never tell Penelope. And then someone gives word to Penelope, but Odysseus is in there as a beggar saying, your husband will be back soon, and she doesn't believe it, and he knows. And what happens is all these Telemachus gets a bit bold with the suitors, and they're all doing a challenge, and they want to string Odysseus's great bow. And only Odysseus can string this. It's monstrous bow. It's big, it's bulky, it's heavy, and none of these these lazy guys are strong enough.
I mean, of course,
yeah, of course, and of course, the only person who can string it is the beggar Odysseus. Even Telemachus struggles, and they think maybe he'll do it, maybe he won't, but the others have no chance. And of course, eventually what happens is Odysseus reveals himself and they have a big battle. So this is the big final battle. It's Telemachus, Odysseus, and the swine herd. And I think at this point they maybe gather up another servant or so. But it's a couple of people against all these suitors. And it almost turns into the Iliad then. We get like a bit of a blow for blow account, but it's just shorter, and we have a big fight scene. And that's fine. It's called The Battle in the Hall. And it doesn't outstay its welcome. It's just one nice contained fight scene. Of course, Odysseus wins. There's blood everywhere, corpses stacked up in the yard. All the maidservants come in to scrub off the blood and put the bodies outside, and some of them get punished for turning against Odysseus. And then he eventually reunites with Penelope, and then at this point Penelope doesn't accept him. Because she's not sure. It's been 2 decades. It's been 20 years, and she's not sure if this is really Odysseus. So they ask him a little trick or two, tell us about our bed. And then it was a bed that he'd built out of a tree because he's king of men. So he knows the story of the bed. It's too heavy for a mortal to move. So she says the bed's been moved, and he says, like, how is that possible? And then she knows it's him. And then something similar happens with his dad. He goes to see his dad, and they do a little memory of his childhood. The dad gave him some trees, and then that's how the dad knows it's him. I guess after not seeing someone for 20 years, you might not recognize them.
Yeah, they didn't have, like, at the end they didn't have photos.
Yeah, exactly. They can even really remember
social media back then.
So Odysseus and Penelope live happily ever after. But then they say, your story is not done. Now you must go on another quest. But this quest is a short quest. He just has to go to make some offerings to the gods. So that's fine.
Yeah.
And the last chapter is called The Feud Is Ended. And that is an interesting one where it kind of ties up not just the Odyssey, but the Iliad. It ends the whole feud and ties together the whole kind of saga. But there's 24 stories in both books, because there's 24 letters of the Greek alphabet. So it was just Homer made it this nice little, way to set it out.
Yeah.
And that's it.
What is your... Yeah. what is your conclusion of the book? In my opinion, it's an absolute classic and it's a must read especially if you're into Roman antiquity or Greek antiquity. It's a must read, even if you're not
yeah, because this
into.
is you've seen this story 100 times in movies. You know what I mean? Not every detail of it, but bits of it. Where they're going on quests and they're fighting monster after monster, or where they have to clear out bad guys from their own castle or whatever it is. We've seen elements of this time and time again. It's an ageless story. It'll never get old. It is a classic for a reason.
But it's kind of one of the first stories that does this as well.
Yeah, I mean, it is. It's curious because it was written, we're talking 8th century BC. So actually, really, during the Greek Dark Ages. So the period of Greece that everyone knows is sort of 5th to 4th century. That's the classical Greece, Athens versus Sparta, Peloponnesian War, Socrates, Plato, all this lovely stuff. This really progressive Athenian society and this military Sparta. But before that, we have the Archaic period, which is the period that the classical Greeks looked back on and reflected on, where all their lawmakers were, where their kind of societies had been reformed, and their city-states, their polis, had been restructured in certain ways politically. But before that was the Dark Ages, and that's kind of a cutoff where a lot of people will start studying from the Archaic period. The Dark Ages isn't a popular place to study, but it was the late Dark Ages, before we moved to the Archaic period, really, where Homer wrote these books. And because of that, I think that's part of the issue with poorer record keeping, and that's why Homer is almost a mythological creature, in the sense that people aren't 100% sure if he existed, and then just like Shakespeare.
I wanted to ask you, do you think that it was, because it's speculated quite a lot, if it was one person who wrote this, if Homer is real, or if it was several people calling themselves Homer, and it ended up kind of like the Bible thing, where it's ended up under one name, like Homer. What do you think about this? What is your theory?
I think I don't have, obviously no one knows for sure, but I think the easiest answer to the Homeric question is just to assume that the Iliad and the Odyssey were written by the same person. Now, reading them, they read very, very differently. As I say, the Iliad is a very, very tedious book. The Odyssey is a really fun book. But then right at the end, we have this little chapter that ties it all together that kind of harkens back a little bit to the style in the Iliad. And even during the battle scene, there's a couple of ways of speaking that remind me of the Iliad. So maybe I'm thinking, okay, maybe it's the same guy. He's just trying a different style. But there's no real way to know, to be honest. But the interesting thing is, Homer did write more. Well, as Homer, a lot more works were attributed to Homer than just the Odyssey and the Iliad, but shorter works. And I've read some. There's the Little Iliad, which is similar, content. But the one I remember reading the most were the Homeric hymns. And there's some other story about a frog or something. I vaguely remember, but I read the Homeric hymns, and they just poetic type stuff. That was also popular in ancient Greece with Pindar and people like that. There's a lot of hymns, but they were kind of discredited as being from Homer. These shorter works that maybe at some point someone was trying to jump on the bandwagon and say, well, these are also by Homer, but I think their style's too different, the quality's inferior, it's just not the same type of work at all. So those are not recognized anymore as still being Homeric, whereas the Odyssey and the Iliad are. So I like to think that, there's someone's made that conclusion, and there's a reason why we've dropped some off, but we still keep those two, and it's kind of like,
and I think I think it's a shame that there hasn't been a movie made from the Odyssey. I mean, it had one in the 90s, but it hasn't really aged well.
Yeah,
and I think it would absolutely work in today's cinematic.
Definitely. You'll find that there's definitely been a lot of productions made of Greek stuff. It's just all so old and low budget that it doesn't hold up anymore, and definitely a few remakes would be in order. I'd love to see a lot of new Greek plays staged as well, actually. There's definitely a lot of scope for that. But I like to think of Homer like Shakespeare. We look back and we think, well, did he really, was it really the same person? Did he really write all these things? It's just easier to say that he did, until we've got a piece of evidence that says that this is true. Until something disproves it, we might as well just work on the assumption that it's true,
Yeah, and I think it's definitely holds, like we talked about earlier today, it holds up until this day. That's what makes this so remarkable. This story that it holds up.
It does. It holds up as because this is the thing. You could give this to a child. You could tell them nothing about ancient Greece. They would just assume it was a kind of fantasy place, like most of the novels they're reading anyway.
Yeah.
And there's monsters, there's beautiful girls, there's tough warriors, there's a lot of things happening, and they would just think this is a lovely epic. They wouldn't.
Yeah.
As long as you get a decent translation, I use reuse translation, but as long as you get a decent translation where the language in English isn't too archaic or whatever language you want to read it in, you would just think it's a modern novel.
Exactly, and that's what's so amazing about this book, and it should have more recognition than it has in today's society as well, I think.
I think so, yeah. I often wonder if people make the mistake of, I'll read the Iliad first, then they get bored, and then they never make it to the Odyssey.
Yeah, I was considering reading the Iliad, but I just went with the Odyssey first, and I'm honestly glad that I did.
I mean, I read a book a week. I've tried to do the Iliad twice, and I just can't get through it. It's just too boring. And
I do the same. I'm trying to read a book by Gibbon about the decline and fall of the Roman Empire, and it's just impossible to get through. So I feel you.
You get that sometimes. You do. But look, I think that's pretty much. I mean, do you have anything else that you wanted to bring up? Because that's kind of all I had prepared.
Yeah, the same here. And if you want, you can find us on social media on the world.age12. We are available on Spotify, YouTube, wherever you can find podcasts.
Yeah.
And well, if you're listening to next week's episode, you might get an episode you might not expect.
Ooh, I'm gonna look out for that. We have all the same kind of stuff, so we're in social media. What I always just tell people is go to booksboys.com, because on there's links to our social medias, but there's also links to, Apple, Spotify, a million other pod catchers. So if you want to find a way to listen to the show, it's just go to booksboys.com and it's all on there.
Yeah, and when do you release usually a month? Some people
we release the last day of every month.
Okay, so the new episode should come out today on the recording of this one.
An episode has just come out today, and then I'll release this, through the month as a bonus kind of episode. But yeah, last day of every month we release because we talk about what we've been reading that month, so that's why.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for doing this collaboration, and a special shout out to TNC, That's Not Canon Production, for making this collaboration happen.
Yes, indeed. They're good guys.
Yes, check them out as well. It's basically like a Netflix for podcasts. You can browse several podcasts. It's a web page site worth checking out.
Well, that's us then. Have yourself a good evening, sir.
And I'll see you next time.